Good afternoon to all. I came to give a happy conference. I mean, at a final one, so it changes my mood. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Commercial Chronicler for inviting me again. For me, it's a pleasure to be here. Besides, I see many who I really appreciate, as is the case of Hernan, who have talked with me not in my other life when I wrote, and those things more profoundly, of economics. It's also a pleasure to see Willie, a pleasure to see Julian. Ah, you came in the end. Vladimir was watching the poll party with me. So we have the luxury of having the Vice President of the Central Bank too. Who will imagine that in the meantime of the party we made, we talk about economics? Minister Kirchner, Minister Toto Capito Furiasi, the icon of orthodoxy, Feli, the Deputy of the Moines, and the great architect of the triumph of freedom of advance, Karina Mayona. Today's talk I have raised is in terms of changeable discussion. It seems to me that it is not my style in the face of something that is being debated, given that for so many years I have debated this kind of thing, to talk about another topic. I mean, it seems to me that it was relevant for me to talk about topics precisely about this debate that exists about money, prices, the type of exchange, and obviously the accumulation of reserves. The talk has 3 blocks. First block is I'm going to show why many times with these issues economists are part of the problem, not of the solution. I mean that of looking at the series of types of real change. To say it in a very polite way, it is very precarious intellectually. Block 2 has to do with why we have chosen a scheme of changeable demands. And block 3 is going to be directly about accumulation of reserves. So the first point is that when you do the analysis of the type of real change, I find it quite arbitrary if you only do the math with the price index. Honestly, you have the estimations of the International Monetary Fund and of different and other organizations that make the estimation from GDP to PPP. And you construct the quantities, which is also done. But not only that, but the difference between GDP to PPP and GDP to current values. That is telling you if the economy is really expensive or not. So if my GDP to PPP is higher than my GDP to current values, and they're taking all the prices of all the products that enter the GDP computer, I mean, it is quite tempting to choose an index to say that there is a problem with the exchange rate. In addition, it has another problem, and that is that you are looking at a problem of macros. You are looking at macros, and you are doing an analysis of the partial equilibrium. You are ignoring all the rest of the situations in the economy. For example, I have seen Toto explain to the point of exhaustion For example, when they do the comparison, no, this is like 2017. What part is like 2017? I would like to know what is the part that coincides with 2017, because basically the fiscal adjustment was never made. In fact, when the Macri government received the government, that is, instead of making the adjustment, what it did was increase the fiscal deficit. In addition, at no time did it correct it, and it only corrected it with debt. That is, during the Macri government, $60 billion net were borrowed. And the reality is that we, after 123 years, we balance a treasury in a single month. And in 6 months, the central bank, we made an adjustment to 15 points of the GDP. In fact, one of the things that Toto usually mentions with a lot of criticism is that we could have made the fiscal adjustment, put the accounts in order, and there would have been an hyperinflation. So we have fiscal balance. We have barely a current account deficit. With the main engine of the current account deficit, which is not an important number either, is generated by private investment. That is, it is not generated by tax deficit. So how am I going to compare a situation of tax circles practically balanced to the current account, and all the impulse of the current account is generated by an increase in the demand for capital assets? So the truth, and leaving the fiscal balance aside, it seems to me, is to leave aside precisely the element that explains the 20 out of 22 crises that Argentina has had since 1900 until now. So the truth is that it seems capricious to choose only a set of prices to make the calculation. Second, it has a problem of partial balance analysis, ignoring everything else. In fact, by the way, we paid off $50 billion in debt. In other words, we cancelled debt. So it is there is a problem. That is, they look at a general balance problem with tools of partial balance. Inexorably, that will be wrong. On the other hand, they take a series and calculate the average. And the reality is that they calculate the average according to where they like the exchange rate to remain, especially to save customers, saying that they are victims of their bad recommendations. There is one that is known because it sent to bankruptcy a very important company, was its exchange rate errors. So they want to liquefy hunger and the Argentinians their mistakes of forecasts. It's a whole topic. There is one in one of the books of Baerbock, which is power or market law. It's like the case of, suppose you have a doctor, and the doctor is impregnated with a diagnosis, and he is dedicated to looking for a way to break that diagnosis everywhere, until the diagnosis is the one he wants. Well, the question is, would you go to see that doctor? I say because he is going to kill them, literally. So one can say, well, average value. When could you use an average? Would you use as an approximation of a value the average value of a series that has a lot of volatility? Exactly, if you have a problem of a lot of volatility, the average is not a good indicator. And what is it that characterizes volatility in Argentina? You have the times of unbridled populism. The exchange rate is to the clouds. When you have a government that does things in order, and the exchange rate is appreciated. In fact, when you take the stylized facts of the successful stabilization process, the counterpart is that the exchange rate is appreciated. So given that volatility, it doesn't make much sense to work with the average. In addition, they have a stylized fact of how the exchange rate moves in Argentina. In light of whether or not the stabilization process is more or less successful, what they did not have in mind is that, in that sense, not only that series also has a tendency. Then it has a tendency problem, it has a volatility problem. But not only that, but it also ignores the exogenous shocks. And the exogenous shocks can be 112, 0, 11, 00, 11, 2000, because you had some change in the exchange terms. That is to say that it has to do with the international issue, or it can have to do with an internal shock, like the KUKA risk. I mean those who live by prophesying the apocalypse. They denied the KUKA effect, and then they said that the KUKA effect broke out after the elections, and they continue to deny it. That is, there is an attempt to force the instrument, the diagnosis, to give what they want to give. And the most interesting thing is that all this is economic theory. It does not qualify as economic theory, because this is absolutely precarious. It is very, very precarious. It does not qualify as economic theory, because this is absolutely precarious, of terrible quality. And when one answers with serious economic theory, they accuse it of being dogmatic. No, he's in good economic theory is not dogmatic. It is being a good economist. So now let's go to the other problem. So now let's seriously think about what the real exchange rate problem is. From my point of view, you have to look at it with a macro perspective. What would be general balance? There is also another thing of a terrible level and regrettable, and economists believe that a system of equations is the general balance. No, the system of general balance has a certain characteristic. The equations, it is not anything. They have a certain format. And I risk that the vast majority of those who talk about this type of thing do not know that it is a homogeneous function at degree zero. Uncle, with which I already suspect that they do not know anything about general balance. But that is another issue. Now, when you take a model of general balance to determine the relative price balance fact, and then suppose that money is the numerator, and then all goods are expressed in relation to money, what is it that determines the solution of a general balance model? It is determined by preferences. It is determined by technology. It is determined by donations. And that is in a normal case. But this is not the only thing that you would have to contemplate. Because, for example, if I, in the determination of a general balance model, take only these three elements, and I do not worry about the question of the property rights, then it gives me the extreme socialist solution, real socialism or capitalism. It seems to me that it does not work. These things are not even explicit. They are not explicit because they do not know them. Not only that, but also the other issue is the institutions. Because you have a legal framework, but then it is not fulfilled. That also has an important role. Now, it means that in order to solve the general balance system, scaled in a numerator called money, which may be the one issued by the central bank or another, basically, in that model, I have to know to solve in a single period. What are the preferences of all the agents? What is the technology? What are the initial donations? Of money? The technology? What are the initial donations? How much are property rights in that economy really were? And how much the institutions work? Not at all Hayek spoke of fatal conceit, because as much as it weighs on us economists, Hayek, what we can't talk about is what we do not know. That is, we can have an idea of what we do not know, of what cannot be done, where we should not get involved because the remedy is worse than the disease. That is, there is no way for you to know that fact, so that they can solve the system. Therefore, any evaluation they make about the type of exchange rate is bullshit. Because for you to say that the exchange rate is high or low, you should know the value of equilibrium. And to know the value of equilibrium, not only in general equilibrium, you have to know the whole vector. And to know the whole vector, you have to know all the things I just said that you do not know. Now, it is also not a static problem. The economy does not end today. The problem of the economy is a matter of dynamic range. And then, if I have a dynamic problem, now, not only do I need to know all these parameters, but I should also know them intertemporally. That is, I would have to know today's preferences to infinity. But for that I would have to know, for example, what is going to happen to the population, how they are going to mutate the preferences. Not only that, but also, as if all that were little, they are going to have to infer the technological progress. In fact, things that would not have been registered in the set of donations. It may be that in the future they discover that there are things that they can use that they did not know, or perhaps it is not what is happening with a lot of minerals and other things, that today it is known that they can be used for other things. Perhaps 100 years ago it was not known. They have to put it in some way. Therefore, I have to know all these parameters. There is the preferences, the technology, the evolution of the population, the evolution of technological progress, the donations, the institutions, the property rights from here to eternity. That's his, and to know that I would have to be omniscient, omnipresent and omnipotent. In other words, it would be God. I have some news for you. Economists do not qualify in that category. The knowledge of the economy does not qualify in that category. And only those who are fatally conceited socialists believe that they can have that level of knowledge. That is the heirs of rationalism. But the heirs of rationalism took us to communism. It did not work. It was a failure in the economic, in the social, in the cultural. And there is a detail which for me is no less, but perhaps for the communists, yes, because in fact they consider it something that was necessary. They killed 150 million human beings. On the other hand, the difference in all the branch that makes it with John Locke in front recognizes that man is fallible, that he can be wrong, he is not perfect. And from there, they go to the author of the Austrian school they want. Therefore, that analysis, not only that it is a partial balance, but it has the worst of the combinations of what Hazlitt would say is the bad economist. Hazlitt says in a wonderful book, which I recommend emphatically, he says the book is wonderful. It avoids a lot of stupidity that is repeated daily. It is called The Economics in a Lesson. And in that book he says, What the difference is between the good economist and the bad economist? Well, the bad economist only looks at a market and ignores all the other markets. That is, he makes partial balance versus general balance, and also ignores time. That is, he makes economy of a single period. So, in that context, see that this way, as many economists look at the problem, is man, I would not even qualify it to be economics. So, someone who raises, if he does an analysis, the type of real change. Saying this, I say, and he answers that I am dogmatic. Man, stop resorting to the fallacy to dominate, right? I say that this show me that I'm wrong. Now with things that do not close. But now I'm going to do it more for fun. I'm going to do it with a very basic general balance model, which is the model of transables and non-transables. It's not a very difficult model. So the type of real change in that model is determined. Guess by the price of transables divided by non-transables. So let's suppose that we are in a situation of balance. Because I don't know, I had a revelation and I found out that that is the balance. So in that context, I suffer an external shock. No, sorry, a negative productive shock on the non-transable sector. What do you think will happen if I have an alpha contraction in the non-transable sector? The price of non-transables will rise. If I look at that model, what I'm going to have is that the type of real change is being appreciated. And that appreciation of the exchange rate is indicating to me that I have to direct the resources to the non-transable sector. Because I just had a negative productive shock. Therefore, there is a price signal that says that you have to invest in a non-transable sector. So here comes a set of pyromanic fans of devaluation, and that in the end, they have to wash their client sins, or there are others who went straight to them. Yes. What are you going to ask for devaluation? In other words, if you devalue instead of fixing the problem, what do? They make it worse, because they start to modify the price of the non-transables up. And the price signal goes to the other side. That's what happens when someone wants to determine the prices by the feet. How does it end? Poorly. Argentina has done this for 90 years. So, from being one of the richest countries in the world, it became a country of average income. And if we had not done what we did, today we would be worse than Venezuela. Therefore, that is a no less fact. On the other hand, you have to be tough and ignorant. To take the series of real change types and ignorantly ignore the tax issue. In other words, basically, if you look at this model, it is quite elementary. There is a book by Gregorio, the Chilean. He explains it very easily. Believe me, it is very APB. What do you think happens in this model? If the public spending is low, the currency appreciates. No, sorry, it is as if they had the equivalent of a devaluation. Therefore, they can resist a low type of real change, because they basically ran to the middle stage. If I want to take it in terms of adjustments, we made an adjustment of 15 points of the GDP. But if I want to take it in terms of, they do not like to take the central bank, because they leave them evidence that they do not know about monetary issues. I remember an experienced consultant in a report criticizing what we did with the EFI, and it happens that he does not know what an overnight operation is. And when he had to explain it, he established it. But given the margin of that, We lower the public spending in real terms by 30%. Does that allow them to live with a lower exchange rate? Therefore, the first thing I would say is that if the foundation that an economist provides to say that something does not close, using this variable, I would say at least distrust. And if not, look at that track record, because it is something that in the last 2 years, they have been pitching systematically. The second point I want to make is that of the floating of the bands. What I see in terms of macro analysis, this is bad, but although I see in terms of open economy analysis, it's still worse. I do not know, but I like to give the biography hard and even on both sides. But it's hard for me to believe where they do these things. The first point that I find most interesting of all, and it is the one that triggers this problem, I would love to see, because I play that there are many who talk about rational expectations, and at the same time they talk about fastery. That is, I say it is a zone of inconsistency. But how would it be? The expected price factor. Even the real structure that determines the set of relative prices. The expectation of the prices would be given in a model of rational expectations. Why would it be given? For the amount of money. That is, if you derive a model of expectation, if you derive a model of general equilibrium, is a model with functions of excess demand that all depend on relative prices. And if you use money to buy those goods, the function of demand in January would also be a function. It would depend on what? On the intertemporal path of consumption. And the intertemporal path of consumption would depend on relative prices. That is, with which, if the deep parameters did not change, those that I mentioned before, that we have no way of knowing, the function of demand for money would have to be solid. And that should be equal to the real balance. That is, the amount of money divided by the level of prices. Therefore, when I clear the level of prices, I have the amount of money over the demand for money. And if I increase the amount of money, the nominal scale of the economy that has to go up. That is called the problem of the nominal scale of the economy. The challenge is that many economists ask about the nominal scale of the economy. They do not know what it is, or the nominal anchor of the economy. They do not know what it is. That is why it is rare, this type of discussion that they have. And they do not solve this type of thing well. Well, if you understand that, then the level of price of the economy will be determined. Why? Because of the amount of money. Now, inflation is always and at all times a monetary phenomenon generated by an excess of money supply, either because a supply went up or because the demand fell, or both things happened at the same time. It loses the acquisitive power of money, and all the prices expressed in monetary units go up. The exchange rate is one more. It is the price of the dollar. Now, is this instantaneous? No. We have said it to the point of exhaustion. The lag of monetary policy, as we studied it, show between 18 and 24 months. When there is a new job at the University of Cordoba, it proves that it is 26 months. So if we look at the amount of money in the middle of last year, when we finish cleaning the balance of the central bank, because it had monetary sterilization instruments that generates endogenous growth in the amount of money, I say that's why we don't want to go back to those instruments. We are not dogmatic. We don't want to see more inflation in Argentina. That's the difference. And we, of course, what happens is that we have a bigger client base. We say we have to report to which bank. We say we have to report to 47.5 million Argentinians, not to 3 or 4.
En ese contexto, por lo tanto, si el nivel de precio viene determinado por la escala nominal de la economía, es decir, la oferta de dinero, en la contracara de esto es que lo que va a determinar...
And the only thing that we can do is increase the inflation rate in monetary policy. I mean, someone must have read about Friedman's rule. Then Friedman proposed that the amount of money would increase by 4%. I mean, there are different discussions. There are different monetary rules. Well, our monetary rule is zero emission. Or, let's say, in other contexts, zero supply excess, which is not the same. There is growth and the demand for money grows. There is room for emission, and I am going to discuss that in the part that we discussed the accumulation of reserves. Now, what is the problem in Argentina? The expectations, and for a reason, the Argentines do not form it according to a model of rational expectations. Like, you can do this, the most recent book, this one that I presented. In the arena movement, not the previous one, the one I presented in the Luna Park. The central argument is, when economists see that they have a problem in the model or reality, everything depends. If you work on the decision making, if the model does not work for you, they throw away and look for another one. That is why the experience that is accumulated in the financial system is valuable. How much do you think the model would have fallen in love with and lost money? On the other hand, since the consultants are like the oracle of Delphi, they give advice but do not make decisions. They can make mistakes systematically, which they have been doing for 2 years. So the problem now is that the Argentines form their expectations by looking at the dollar.
Los argentinos forman sus expectativas mirando el dólar.
And the reality, I don't have to get angry with the model. I don't have to get angry with the Argentines. I have to solve the problem. They put me in the place, they put me to solve problems. And if I don't solve the problems, it would be very good if they don't renew my contract. In other words, they put me here to solve problems, not to do exercises of unanimity with the model. In that sense, one of the important parts that was lost in the economic analysis. After the nefarious and sinister book of 1936 appeared, my law, let me pass one, which implied a huge setback in terms of economic theory. One of the things that we lost in the middle is what is called the Hume-Cantillon effect, and that has to do with the way in which money enters the economy. The reality that it is the fault of their work. For more than 30 years, they have been discussing things in economics that make no sense. But beyond that, which I am not going to start discussing, all that because that discussion demands, I already have it measured, it demands about 8 hours, so I'm not going to toss you with that. But what the Hume-Cantillon effect does is show how the income of money impacts the different prices. So I am going to do it with 2 cases. Suppose I have a good A and a good B. Suppose that now, for some reason, the demand for increases and the demand for B falls. What would the counterpart of that have to be? That the price of A rises and the price of B falls. As long as I have the nominal amount of fixed money, everything that goes up to A, and I have a set of insolent consumers, In continuing to consume A, they are going to spend more on A. Therefore, if they spend more on A, they inevitably have to spend less on B. Therefore, the price of B is going to go down. The only way that this does not happen is when there is monetary emission. If you have monetary emission, what happens? They increase the amount of money, so the price of B does not fall and the price of a rise is more than proportionally. In general, the argument of why central banks are making these atrocities is because it says that prices are rigid at the bottom. Well, you really don't know that because he don't know if they are rigid at the bottom. Because if all day in the last 90 years, except in 10, they spend emitting it, how do they know that they are rigid at the bottom? If they spent their whole life validating it monetarily. In fact, there is a wonderful book by Philip Megis called Defending Deflation. One of the things it shows is that the classics, which did not make economics for leisure, but rather made economics to solve serious problems. You review all the classical literature. Nobody cared about deflation. There was nothing. Nobody dealt with the issues of deflation, and yet they had patronora. So I say, it may not be that at that time they had no way of doing monetary validation, and consequently the prices moved. Of course, if you always say the prices go up, and well, in case of doubt, I leave it. But Menger is going to discipline them if that were the case, so that prices go up. Would depend on there being monetary emission. What is the problem in Argentina? That in them. Last 90 years, that is, since we had a central bank, in 80 we have lived with monetary validations at the rate of the tax deficit. Therefore, when the problem of the trust crisis flourished, the demand for money fell, they bought dollars, the price of the dollar went up, then the price of the banners went up, then the price of the majors went up, then the minors, and finally the salaries. That is why it is also so unpopular, because it destroys the real salaries. That is to say, every time you have an oracle of else calling for devaluation, I would ask you directly why you are telling me that you want to favor a group of criminals who do not want to compete to impoverish the vast majority of Argentinians. That is the question that I would ask myself. I say clearly because you are paid. The one who stole, and the other Argentines do not. So, notice that if you repeatedly repeat this exercise to someone who does not know about economics and is not obliged to know about economics, that is why economists are there. That is why they studied economics. That is, if I do not know, I study sociology, I study psychology, I study law, I do not know what they want, architecture or whatever. I say, when it comes to this, an economist listens to it. I say the economist should know that it is the Cantillon effect, not the people. But what happens in this dynamic that I have just described, then you see that the exchange rate goes up, and what will happen next? And are all the prices going up? Then, if you do not know anything about economics, if the exchange rate goes up, the prices go up. In fact, the only experiment that did not have inflation since we had a central bank was which? Convertibility, just when the exchange rate was fixed. So when you want to explain to them, look, the amount of money is fixed, when all the money overhangs and when they finish acting the reserve of monetary policy, there will be no more inflation. Well, I believe you. But you know what? In the middle I buy dollars. And obvious. Now I say to you, what are you going to do in the face of that situation? Are you going to get angry with reality, or are you going to act taking into account that Argentines for 90 years were scammed by an institution called the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic that was dedicated to financing Agripa. Scammers who are the politicians who made tax deficit. You have to get angry with the consequences. You have to get angry with the causes. The cause, the mother of all evils, which is the tax deficit. We said, I went out in the election campaign with a chainsaw that they said it was impossible, that by chance I was going to be able to make an adjustment to put the tax accounts in balance in 4 years. Unless having 15% of the Chamber of Deputies and 10% of the Chamber of Senators. We did it in a month. So, when you have this mechanism of formation of expectations, if you want to work it, as if you are working with rational expectations, do you know what is going to happen? They are going to be thinking about reality with a mechanism, with agents that are not what you have, and you know what? If you think about that, you are going to be wrong. That is, they are only going to be right when the type 2 error appears. That is, they did everything wrong and it turned out to be very good by chance. Having said that, another topic, and here there are many people linked to finance. I know that when you want to evaluate if a wallet is good or not, what do you evaluate it with? With the Sharpe ratio, right? That is, with which, in principle, I would believe that for all. In general, volatility is bad. I don't think volatility is good. In fact, if you have two wallets that yield the same and one has more risk, what would you end up with? With the one that has less risk? I say it doesn't seem like that would be more or less the criterion. That is what the economic theory says. Now, if that is dogmatism, okay, call me dogmatic then. But what is the problem? So, if I am at risk, I don't like volatility. And my expectation formation mechanism is not the one of rational expectations. Because if the agents look at me in rational expectations, look at the amount of money, the wide monetary base, okay, I finish cleaning the lights. And that's it, the problem is over. The problem is, do the agents do that? No. They've bad experiences from the last 90 years. The one who burned himself of milk sees the cow and cries. So, what do? Do I get mad at the agents? Or do I design the policy according to the agents I have? This second path seems more reasonable, and I shouldn't try to impose a model on their heads that they don't think about. So, why is it important to take into account the role of volatility? Because if I now have this expectation formation mechanism, depending on the exchange rate and not depending on the amount of money, the volatility that I have in the market of debt is going to pour out in where? In the market of goods, with which I am going to have volatility in prices. And if the price level goes above the one that determines the amount of money, the nominal scale, what do I generate? Recession. I eat a recession, that is, a drop in GDP, a drop in employment, a drop in real wages, increases in poor and indebted people. What geniuses they propose to us. It is noticeable that this type, not only that they never sat in the electric chair, but also, that is, they ignore what the electric chair is. I am going to tell you an anecdote that is very funny. Everyone knows that I am a great friend of Professor Juan Carlos de Pablo. And when I read Rothbard for the first time, I said, Rothbard is very revealing. I realized that what I had been studying and teaching for many years, a large part of that knowledge was wrong. And that made me have a very critical position regarding the policymakers. And when I spoke with De Pablo, I noticed as condescending with the politicians. I did not come to Mind that a person with the knowledge or the experience was condescending with these people. I could not believe it. I mean, I could not stand it in any way. I mean, it could not be. We were always arguing, recurrently, and the professor, with a lot of wisdom, given that we had looked at World Cups together, we had had parties together, we had a wonderful bond, he said. Let's disconnect until it matures a little. That is why it makes me laugh when they say no, no. There are two idiots who say no, he wants to apply anarcho-capitalism. This is not anarcho-capitalism, this is more common sense than anarcho-capitalism. But it seems that there are people who did not separate the philosophical from the real. But it does not matter, they are the same, they do not differ in the model of reality. And in that context, one of the things that happened, then we met again and we had the same relationship as always, and already in the role that the Argentines have conferred on me. In the Oliveros dinners, in which they obviously imagined that we were talking about economy. In front of a group of friends, I publicly apologized to the professor, because one of the things that I realized is that I tried to contemplate the restrictions. When I was doing my analysis and my other life, that I was an economist, and I realized that being in the electric chair, the restrictions are some more, but it is very funny because after what this pre-season has been in hell, that it started back there in March and that it ended on October 26. It is very interesting because I did a whole learning. I think we all did a very strong learning of what we are in the electric chair, because not only were we in the electric chair, but there were people wanting to touch the buttons. I say some with incentives to touch the buttons, others from the inside touching the buttons, others who did it by accident. It was very interesting, the whole process, a lot of learning. So one of the things he told me was that one from his experience of having spoken with so many ministers of economy and president of the central bank, he was surprised by how these people did not have a heart attack per month. And the devolution that he gave me, I don't know how you don't get a heart attack every day. With which I can assure you that the problem of restrictions, volatility, and because apart from that, I look north. Now I'm going to tell you something. Life is not a straight and uniform movement. So I tried to go to that. I asked my ministers to do it. The only restriction that I put on them is ethical and moral values. That is, it is not worth using all the instruments. That is, if you have to choose between political utilitarianism and moral values, the role is that they choose moral values, because if it resolves the political question is a problem of mine, I take care of myself and I came to do the things that have to be done. Remember when he closed last year and started this one, I said I am going to enter the year with a fiscal adjustment, and we did it. I'm going to enter this year and I'm going to put the balance sheet, and we did it. There is moral values are not negotiated. The pillars of the design of public policy do not violate.
Los pilares del diseño de la política pública no violentan
our values in a dynamic way, because I cannot take charge of the decisions that are made in the past. That for me is already initial conditions. So in this sense, the changeable volatility
En este sentido, la volatilidad cambiaria
translates into volatility of prices, in volatility of quantities, in volatility of real employment, in volatility of employment, in volatility of poor and harmless people.
digamos, de pobres e indigentes.
And that is not a minor issue,
No es un tema menor.
because then what are the bans for? The bans are to put a limit on
Para ponerle un límite a la
volatility, that is, so that the Argentine rises and the exchange rate cannot be anything because it comes from 90 years of being stifled. So that is the reason for the bans, and as we believe in freedom, the bans open up in time.
Creemos en la libertad, digamos, las bandas se abren en el tiempo.
That is, at some point the bans will be so open and the relative of the market price
Y el relativo del precio de mercado
of the bans is going to be a type of free exchange rate, but you cannot pretend to win.
Pero ustedes no pueden pretender ganarle
I agree to Ben Johnson if you are just learning to cheat. It is a matter of common sense.
Es una cuestión de sentido común. Y
And this is a technical issue, and I want to discuss it technically,
técnicamente,
because
¿no? Porque
what is the theme of the bans inspired by?
el tema
What were we
era
thinking when we thought about the
lo
bans?
que era, digamos, lo que estábamos pensando cuando pensamos las bandas.
When you study general equilibrium, you need to use a theorem to solve the existence.
Ustedes, para poder resolver la existencia
The equilibrium, you need to use a fixed point theorem.
un teorema de punto fijo. ¿Sí?
And that set as the function has to be continuous, and the set has to be
Y el conjunto tiene que ser
convex, and it also has to be narrowed down. But real life, especially if you want to think
en especial si quieren pensar
in a dynamic way and think in terms of growth, it is quite
es bastante
little interesting to work with narrowed economies. But if it is not narrowed down, the set
acotada, el conjunto
can be infinite. Consequently, I cannot apply neither the fixed point theorem of
teorema de punto fijo de
Bra nor the one of Kakitani nor any other that is going round. So what is the point?
Entonces, ¿cuál es el punto?
What do the general equilibrium theorists do? Do they stop crying? No, they don't stop crying.
¿Cómo resuelven
How
ese
do they solve that problem?
Le crean
They create an artificial quarter for it.
artificial.
That by creating an artificial quarter allows them to be able to solve the model.
Poder resolver el modelo
If you take into account all the amount of concepts that I'm drawing and that these people who start talking about the type of real change looking at things, they have no idea, right? I doubt that they have the knowledge of topology to have this debate, but
el conocimiento de topología para tener este debate. Pero
apart from that, you put that quarter that allows you to solve the model, and what
eso les permite resolver el modelo y qué es lo
you
que
check
querían.
if the restriction is effective or not.
¿Es efectiva o no la restricción?
While the dollars between the bands, the restriction is not effective.
Entre las bandas, la restricción no es efectiva.
I understand that you have a problem with your clients. Some sent you to 1700.
Algunos se te enviaron a 1700.
Others in 2000, last year. Others said that, for example, if we did everything
Si hacíamos todo
well, the inflation was going to be 400% and the exchange rate, but they also said that we were doing everything wrong. So I say, I love it. It makes me a record all day.
a mí me hacen track record todo el día.
I would like you to make a record for everyone to see who survives the giant magnifying glass.
Vive la lupa gigante.
So that is the argument for which you can think
Ese es el argumento, digamos, por el cual ustedes pueden pensar
among the bands, and if the exchange rate did not touch the band many times,
muchas veces la banda.
the exchange rate touched the band in very specific cases.
Casos muy concretos.
What do they say? Those who have to watch the gill know what happens is that he saved the United States.
Los salvó Estados Unidos. Ja, ja, ja.
And I ask a question, the dollarization of portfolio prior to the election, 42% of M12.
42% de M2.
The highest dollarization level in Argentine history, I say it was never monetized, it was so much.
Dolarizó tanto.
I mean, look at how strong the program that was banked was, because I ask a question,
O sea, miren qué fuerte que era el programa que se bancó eso. Porque yo hago una pregunta.
The entire explanation is the support of the United States. How much do we end up using the swap? 2,000, 3,000, 2,000, 2,000 in 40,000 million. How much is it? 5%. And I want to see that they review what the Congress of the nation did.
Y quiero ver que repasen lo que hizo el Congreso de la Nación
Sanctioning 40 laws intended to break the economic program they never saw in history. And yet, all the help to fix the problem was 2,000 green sticks. It's a lot what I say when they say, oh well, that is, they need to wash them out of the mistakes they made and they need to load it all into an exogenous element that is. Apart from if you told me that the economy operated under normal conditions, pressure and temperature, okay, the inconsistency, then it would be evident. Now, if I voted in the middle 40 laws to break a macroeconomic balance, I say, what are you talking about? Because before the whole process began, the country's risk was under 600 and we did not stop doing things. We healed the assets of the central bank. We healed the assets of the central bank. We did a lot of things and even so the country's risk was still rising. If that is not called risk, I would like to know what it is. But that is another point that is brilliant. I am going to try to make the explanation of everything is infinitely better than mine, which is the idea of the safe asset. Did you explain it well in the morning? How good that is with which I am going to look better today. There, the microeconomist part came out, the relative, thank you, that's how I look better today. Is that I had my bullets for today. So the idea of the safe asset is that if you are in the United States, people are scared, they increase the risk aversion. What do people do? It comes out of risky assets and is placed in treasury titles or in money. Then they have a problem that they have deflationary pressures and as a purchase of the treasury bonds makes the price go up, the interest rate goes down. It generates a compensation effect and then it is a buffer. It makes the activity not suffer so much. Sometimes the increase in the risk aversion is so great that they would almost have to solve it with negative interest rates. But how did they not know what the interest rate is either? For example, every time you hear someone say that the interest rate is the price of money, touch it because that is a brute. I ask you a question in the Ramsey model, the prototypical model of intertemporalism, today the basic macroeconomic model. The question is, does that model have money? And yet it has interest rates. The interest rate exists because there is time, not because there is money. The interest rate is a mechanism of intertemporal coordination that allows you to spend consumption of the present, the future, and vice versa. The same goes for production. The first is called savings, the second is called investment. And the problem of the safe asset is that the safe asset in Argentina is the dollar. And given the mechanism of formation of expectations, when the conditions of intertemporal solvency with 40 laws affect me, and they affect the bonds, I say they leave the bond market and they buy what they buy. The same thing that Americans do, dollars and title of the North American Treasury. The difference is that we are talking about the exchange rate and the price level is a bar. So the discussion of the safe asset is a tremendous discussion. Now, I just gave you a lot of arguments, but there is one that is still stronger than all of them, and that shows how raw these types are. It is noted that for all their lives they have never traded something
tradearon algo.
What is the problem of the depth of the market is called in economic theory. You, to have perfect markets, you need them to be complete and deep.
Que sean completos y profundos.
Well, for example, the exchange market in Chile trades $2,500 million a day.
2.500 millones de dólares diarios.
In Brazil, it trades 4,500 and Argentina 200. There are days that it trades less than 100 sticks.
100 palos.
2 hours, 3 hours, it did not trade anything. And not to mention if two guys appear,
Y ni que hablar, digamos, si aparecen dos tipos.
not from the money table, but with their cell phones, saying, hey, put the price here,
Pon el precio acá,
I'll pay you. Then, with half a green stick, they make the type of exchange jump, and at the
tal tipo de cambio, y al
moment the accomplices journalists appear on this and say, this is the type of exchange,
y ponen estalló el tipo de cambio.
with which people rot in the head. So you are going to tell me in truth.
A la gente. Entonces, ustedes me van a decir en verdad, digamos,
There is no need to float. In other words, it does not meet any of the conditions to float.
no cumple con ninguna de las condiciones para flotar.
In conditions as the United States would flirt, or countries with much more complete and
Países, digamos, con mercados mucho más completos y
much deeper markets. I say a way to fix this is by making the economy more open.
digo, una forma de arreglar esto es haciendo la economía más abierta.
But when we talk about economy, of opening the economy, preventive parasites appear,
Los parásitos prebendarios
demanding that Argentines pay for more expensive, low-quality goods.
caro, bienes de peor calidad.
That is, if it is clear to you that when the one who is asking for protection is asking for
¿A ustedes les queda claro que cuando el que está pidiendo por protección está pidiendo
low wages, that is, protection can be effectively via an arousal or a
si la protección puede ser efectivamente vía un arancel o una
restriction or generating an uncontrolled monetary policy to devalue, and everything leads to the
y todo conduce a lo
same
mismo,
thing to blow up the salaries and increase the poor. I say the truth does not seem to me that it should be.
la verdad no me parece que se deba ser.
Because apart from what they say, how many times have they heard?
¿Cuántas veces escucharon?
No, because if they open the economy, the sector X will fall.
Va a caer.
And no, but it will leave a tangle of unemployed.
¿Y?
False, false.
No, pero va a
Again.
dejar un tendal de desempleados. Falso. Falso. De vuelta.
The fallacy of what cannot be seen. If you open the economy and that good, a certain
Ustedes abren la economía y ese bien determinado
sector breaks down, it is because the good that you are bringing from outside is a better
están trayendo de afuera de mejor
quality
calidad
in or
o
cheaper.
más barato.
When that happens, you have a savings, and that savings you are going to spend
Tienen un ahorro y ese ahorro lo van a gastar
on
en
another
otro
good,
bien.
which is also more productive, and people want it,
Y lo quiere la gente.
with which, in reality,
En realidad,
unemployment does not occur unless they go to a sector that is more productive.
es más productivo.
The economy gains productivity, and in addition, as individuals have more goods,
Individuos disponen de mayor cantidad de bienes,
they are happier.
son más
Of course, the pre-sale entrepreneur who wants to defend his pre-sale and who wants to
defender su prebenda y que quiere
get married in the zoological art, that one is going to be worse.
peor.
The question then is a question,
La pregunta entonces es una pregunta
I say, of moral indolence.
moral.
That is, we save a pre-sale turquoise.
Es decir, salvamos a un prebendario, digamos, tiracoimas,
Coimists are the politicians of another time. I say nor now because I say I cut his head, and
ahora porque digo le corto la cabeza, y
coimists to the media so that they defend the immune position against the rest of the Argentines.
contra el resto de los argentinos.
I say from the moral perspective, to you, it seems good to steal all the Argentines,
Parece bien robar a todos los argentinos
to save a criminal who put himself in connivance with politicians and with
se puso, digamos, en connivencia con políticos y con
media so that they defend the undefendable.
lo indefendible.
I have already taken a position with which we have more than enough arguments to defend the tax, monetary and exchange scheme
Más que sobrados argumentos para defender el esquema fiscal, monetario y cambiario.
that we are having because, said by the way, of course, what happens is that they did not see what is
Claro, lo que pasa es que no ven
Inside, they are not going to see counterfact. That is, they are not going to contemplate that we are saving ourselves from a hyperinflation of 15,000% because they did not internalize the problem of many origin, which was twice as much as that of Rochacosa, with which the inflation would have multiplied by 12. That is, if it came to 300, it would have gone to 3,600. That they did not contemplate that we could have double the amount of money in a day. With the pay pesos, much less. That is, they did not know what an overnight rate is. The only one who spoke of the problem of the LLA. Then the campaign passed. It was me. I am going to pretend that they understand that there was the equivalent of 9 monetary bases winning in pesos. And we did the entire stabilization program, unlike the great palanches who either sent another minister to make the Bornex plan off at Corralito, Corralón and others. We did this while respecting property rates. We did this also by recomposing relative prices of fat tariff. We made the fiscal adjustment. We did not look at the exchange rate to make the task easier. We have a fiscal balance, 123 years. They say that they did not have others. This is interesting. It is interesting because as well as they deny that we pay the debt, they say that historically, that is, since I have used reason and look at the numbers of the fiscal, it was always looked at in a box basis. For those who come from accounting in what is called perceived, the tax numbers were always looked at like this, as we have tax balance in the box basis, in the perceived, as it was always looked at those no tax balance. Because in the base of revenge, that is, the methodology changes as I say, and what they did not realize is that they show that they are brutes in terms of accounting, that they are doing double accounting. When I have bonus type 0 coupon, the interests are going to be redeem the day that I paid the debt, but that debt I already have it registered. It is already charged. It is charged in the debt, that is, with which what they're doing is double accounting, that is, to try to deny the achievements of this giant, which is Toto Capital. Deny and do bad accounting on purpose, because I no longer understand why they make this mistake. But it is more that would be valid if a debt already with a fixed debt, that is, it means that's it. Would have to be discussed in case the debt rises. Bad news for these people who also deny it is that we lower the debt in more than $50 billion. But of course, they have to wash blame with their customers. So now we're going to the issue of the accumulation of reserves. All the debate. I say from my point of view, it is not raised in the correct way. Because the truth is that if I had a flexible exchange rate, fully flexible, one-on-one international monetary economy, I am not asking them to be roads. To whom I had the privilege of knowing. But it is not necessary to be rogues to understand this. If you have a flexible type of exchange date by definition of flexible exchange date, the reserve variation is zero. That is asking for flexible exchange rate. That is, you have to float and ask, accumulate reserves. And today it is a contradiction in terms. Now then they say no, well, but in reality it is that you have to pay the debt. Okay, we are going to discuss then the payment of the debt. Then we have to discuss the condition of intertemporal solvency in a country, because there is a not minor issue that seems that they do not take into account, which is that a country has infinite life. It is not trivial to the terms of the currency, and we do not say the financier either. That means that if the debt-product relationship does not grow in time, that is to say, if it is constant or falls, you are solvent. I say when you have deficit zero, the debt variation is zero, and if the debt variation is zero, if the gross product expands, automatically the debt-product relationship falls. In fact, since we assume the debt-product relationship, it does not stop falling. But then the point is, what is the key value driver? What is a central issue that has to do with the rollover? If I had rollover, what is that of being thinking that I have to have reserves to pay if the interests are paid with tax buttons and the debt is rolled out in the market? God, what are they talking about? That is, they're so rude that they also want to break the finance box. Then, of course, if you on the other side have a rollover, it may be, and they tell you that they're not going to pay, and if they are going to, it may be that they have a rollover problem. Then I say basically, if I have rollover, the biggest problem that Argentina had was the QK risk, the interest rate, so that more or less is the relative price of the present goods compared to the future goods. If I on the other side have a guy who says that he is going to destroy everything, he is going to destroy everything, he is going to break everything, he is not going to leave when the strategy was to break the model of my law. Strategy was I do not pay, I do not do this, I do not break the contracts, I break everything. That scenario is very similar to a scenario that is called the end of the world scenario in what is the typification that DePolo does in the economy as a decisive process. If we are in the end of the world scenario, that sense has to transfer the consumption of the future. If there is no future, is the end of the world scenario. If it is the end of the world scenario and there is no sense for the future consumption because it is only valid today, or because I have my agents who only care about today, or it is caught into temporal myopia, the future disappears, then how much is it worth? There is no demand in the future, therefore how much is the future price zero, therefore the interest rate is infinite. Look at how good real we managed to, despite the barbarities that Benedetto said. Even so, it only reached 1500. And sometimes it also requires knowledge to be able to understand the counterfact now. But again, as we do not get angry with reality, we take it as it is then. Okay, I do not have rollover, I have to have reserves. Then if I have to reserve, then check if I have to pay or not, and if I use them to pay, then, and I had a problem that I go to the edge of the ban, I cannot defend it. That is the discussion. Then now someone asked himself, then what are the reserves? I say someone asked himself why they accumulate reserves. I say the United States does not accumulate reserves, Europe does not accumulate reserves, because then it accumulates reserves, because then I have a problem that occasionally The capital market closes them. What I need to buy is insurance. We all agree, because if we do not agree with what I'm going to say, then I buy insurance. Then the key when I go to buy insurance, that is the prime. Well, let's see what prime we are willing to accept as Argentines. Well, a possibility is that ignoring everything I said before, from the expectation formation mechanism, from the problem of volatility of the safe asset and the depth of the market, I go out to buy like an elephant in a bazaar. I go out to buy dollars emitting as that does not have as a counterpart of money demand generates in excess of money supply, and that generates inflation. That is to say, the tax on upward. That is to say, those who are asking me to do that are asking me to ruin the lives of Argentines. Enough labor cost us. There are 13 million Argentines get out of poverty. Notice that if you take each of the achievements of this government, if I had been Peronist today, half of the streets of Argentina would carry my name. But of course, as I'm a heartless liberal, nothing more now. God even asked things that are inconsistent, and the truth is that it seems to me that insurance against generating pull to insure the dollars, I do not know who can buy them. To me, it does not seem bad to me that they buy the two of them who want them to feel like it. But the problem arises in itself. It is fatty. It seems that it is fair to buy. Artificially in insurance, ruining those who have less for those who want it than the insurance. To protect people, God, the insurance are to protect. Then you are telling me that I have to make sure of a crisis generating a crisis. It is rare. That is because I finish on top of the problems I pointed out before I finish. Self-generating, therefore, I'm sorry, for the option to generate inflation and break the quality of life of millions of Argentines. That is not mine. The other alternative, I say at some point there is some methodological consultant of dramatic. What is the problem with? We make money, we take it out on the other side, sterilizing the central bank. They use it all. The central banks of the world, because we were not clear what it was. For example, not only this case of what we avoid the catastrophe. That we avoid using the instrument. I'm going to tell you something. This disaster also occurred in '89, and that same consultant who accuses me of being dogmatic told his clients that he spoke with Machinia and that he told them that he was not going to evaluate after he evaluated. Then they said, but you said that Machinia told you that he was not going to evaluate. Well, I'm going to tell you something. That consultant did not even speak with Machinia. I say so. They are getting to know each other. We are going to take out the mask from everyone. The other alternative is good. And now not only pay the interest, also pay a capital with which to pay the capital. If I'm today in deficit zero, what am I going to have to do to reduce the public spending more like we are reducing it? But I let you know that about 75–80% of the public spending is social, with which they are proposing to me then that I raise the taxes. You know that inflationary taxes or explicit taxes for me are still taxes. Consequently, the insurance is very expensive because it kills economic growth. That is to say,
Caro porque mata el crecimiento económico. Es decir,
in the end, it ends up harming the Argentine people of good. The other alternative is that I
alternativa es que yo lo
do it with debt. I see a rollers, and if I also want to have more reserves, well, what?
roleo y si además quiero tener más reservas, bueno, lo que
I can do. This man has one of the most difficult jobs in the world, which is my boss.
más difícil del mundo, que es mi jefe.
Protocol, they did not know how bad it is because I have a problem with the protocol.
Problema de incumplimiento con el protocolo.
That exceeds me. I say goodbye, but I need the code air so that my face does not disintegrate.
Pero necesito el aire frío para que no se me desintegre la cara.
If I put the cold air, they hit the column and I get cold, but I prefer that my face does not disintegrate. While they see me, then what I have to choose is, okay, I owe myself. I say tavern insurance.
Yo lo que tengo que elegir es, ok, me endeudo, digo, para tener un seguro.
Well, I can do it because it is the debt that perhaps I cannot take at the moment that I have to roll over. Well, then if we take more debt than beyond the rollover, and they are going to start complaining that we are in debt. Yes, of course, they did not want to accumulate reserves. That is another way. This seems more reasonable than it is like good. I am at risk. I am afraid of losing access to the market. Then when the window opens, I take advantage of it. I change the profile of the investment below the rate, and also I save some extra dollars in case I have a problem. I say that seems more reasonable. It is not neutral in terms of distributive effects, but we can discuss it. And the other is to make privatizations. Obviously, what is the prime? And the size of the assets that I am liquidating. Then I liquidate those assets and I leave them in the central bank, or the other thing, or I take more debt and the treasury with that pays a central bank creditor of the Argentine Republic. That it is reasonable then. But for that we need to go back to the market, and we have high confidence that we are going to do it because the payment is for January. You already said it, right? Yes, so in that. Since we are going to honor the debts, and we hope that it improves the quality of the economic analysis of Argentina, and they are not all the time there has to be explaining that 2 plus tier is 4 beyond that. We believe that we have a huge opportunity we have left behind. The risk keeper, the election of October 26 has been surely impressive. If it had been a presidential election, the result of the election would have been 41 to 24. That is called the first round. Not only that, but also if many ghost lists were used to deceive people, if you correct for that effect, we would have achieved 45 percentage points of what the package would have been bigger, and even when they had taken out more, they did not reach them either. It is not even necessary to take out 10, and also my face is not on a ticket. I was campaigning and my face is not on a ticket. What is more, we won the province of Buenos Aires and our face was not on the ticket, and we still won it. And that is why the other day, with everything, it was not like it was with feet. We said that a single paper ticket had been the biggest productivity gain in Argentine history because the rest QQ has collapsed the risk. QQ has collapsed the interest rate, has collapsed the interest rate that allows the marginal product of capital to be low. That is the opposite of that, is more capital in the economy. If I have more capital in the economy, it increases the productivity of work and real wages increase. That is to say, it is a shock of productivity because the fraud in Argentina, no government being an official wanted to make the single paper ticket, and the only ones who had the courage to do it were us. But also this election not only allowed us to get the third and deputies to defend the bets. In reality, there were 127 seats at stake. We won 64, that is to say, because of the distribution of votes. We took out more than 50% of the seats available in deputies, and that today allowed us to Martin Menem be the president of the Chamber of Deputies for 2 more years, and Brial, the ones who are going to handle the commissions in the Congress. But as if this were not enough, there were 20 seats at stake in senators, and of those 20 seats,
Pero como si esto fuera poco, había 22 bancas en juego en senadores. Y de esas 22 bancas nosotros
113, not only that today we have 20 senators, or 21 according to how the computer is made,
20 senadores o 21 según cómo se hace el cómputo.
but also
Sino que además
lost most of the Peronism today. They have 28 senators, therefore we are
hoy tienen 28 senadores. Por lo tanto, nos encontramos
facing a possibility of having the most reformist Congress in the history of Argentina. Because if we were 15% of the deputies and 10% of the senators have made the largest structural reform in the history of Argentina with this Congress, did not have doubts that we are going to go to the bone until being Argentina is the freest country in the world that will allow us to be great again. Thank you very much.